My name is Will, and this is the 11th video in a series about the DC Comics character Martian Manhunter. This will cover some of the character's appearances from 1985 to 1987. Specifically, I'm going to talk about two crossovers, the Crisis on Infinite Earths and Legends, and how John fits into them. During this time, the main writer for the Justice League changes from Gerry Conway to J.M. DeMatteis. Now, J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen would write stories with John in them for 6 years, and they would make significant changes and additions to the character. But in this video, I am primarily going to talk about the time when DeMatteis was transitioning John through the Legends comic event and through a relaunch of the Justice League. Okay, the Crisis on Infinite Earths was the first really big crossover event in DC history, and it's probably one of the most famous comic events ever, having been replicated in TV's Arrowverse and in DC's animated movies. There were two driving factors in this crossover. One was continuity. At this time, the fan base really appreciated continuity, and part of what DC Comics was selling was a shared universe. DC had split its own characters into Earth 1 and Earth 2, with Earth 2 being the Golden Age characters and Earth 1 being the Silver Age characters. This resulted in inconsistencies, like how in Earth 2 Batman was dead and had a daughter with Catwoman, while in Earth 1 he was alive. So to present a meaningful, consistent, shared universe, they planned to collapse all these stories into being in a single world. The other driving factor was intellectual property. DC had often squashed the competition by using acquisition. DC had acquired the comic companies Quality Comics, Fawcett Comics, and Charlton Comics, and wanted to get something out of it by using the characters they had purchased and mix them in with their existing characters. So again, they wanted to take these other worlds and combine them with their own world. So, the Crisis on Infinite Earths became this metatextual event where the purpose of the story was to combine comic lines into a shared universe. So they bring in a huge number of characters from different comic lines into this series. John was one of those characters. He gets recruited to be part of a superhero army and fights alongside people like Captain Marvel, who was from Fawcett Comics. Now, because this book had so many characters, there wasn't a lot of focus for most of the individual characters. John gets a handful of lines, which is better than most. The story combines all these worlds, and in doing so, it supposedly alters the past of this comic world to be that of a shared world. This past alteration allows them to reset some characters, notably Wonder Woman and Superman, who both started new comics. Now, in most cases, there isn't a magical moment where history changes and the comics keep on going like normal. John before the Crisis is identical to John after the Crisis. This event, however, does open up the possibility for later authors to revisit or alter established continuity and essentially rewrite the past. Gerry Conway doesn't change anything due to the Crisis, but his time writing the Justice League would end and J.M. DeMatteis and Keith Giffen would take over. DeMatteis would take advantage of this universal reboot and reimagine John Jones and make some substantial changes, but more on that in a later video. Okay. The Crisis on Infinite Earths was very popular, and DC wanted to do another big crossover. In fact, big crossovers basically became a yearly event after this. So they did Legends, which was basically them launching this new shared universe that combined characters from DC's various comic universes. This included relaunching the Justice League. This relaunch wasn't about them creating a new cast to be like X-Men or Teen Titans, but rather than bringing together comic characters from different universes. It included Dr. Fate from the Golden Age, or Earth 2 as they called it, Captain Marvel from Fawcett Comics, and Blue Beetle from Charlton Comics. It also included John and Batman, the only two members from the previous Justice League to be members in this new league. But I skipped ahead. To get to the launch of this new league, two things had to happen. First was the Legends event and the miniseries, which was written by John Ostrander and Len Wein, and would set up the launch of the new league. The second part was the dissolution of the old league. J.M. DeMatteis wrote the last 6 issues of the Justice League of America alongside the Legends event to basically end the existing league. Now, Legends was a pretty great comic, but I'm mainly going to talk about the last 6 issues of Justice League of America. Of the old league, only 2 characters would transition over to the new post-Legends league, John and Batman. Now, Batman was doing plenty of stuff in Legends, and he doesn't appear in these issues, and his absence is only mentioned in passing. So, John gets a lot of focus during these issues, because he'll be the only character to be in the new league. The story is also about the League falling apart, and it deals with what the League means to John. Okay, when last we left John, he was dealing with this retro PI plot where he had gotten framed for murder and was trapped in a burning building. Now, completely drops the unfinished film noir murder mystery that was being written by Gerry Conway. but he immediately uses being trapped in a burning building to flesh out Ja'an. Ja'an starts thinking about his grandmother and hallucinating that he sees Haranmir, the Martian god of death and fire. Now, Conway had kind of introduced Martian religion by having Ja'an exclaim, "Gods of Mars!" But DeMatteis is the first to start fleshing out this part of Martian culture with the god Haranmir, who would become very important later. Okay, after Ja'an hallucinates, he is magically summoned to help Zatanna. He uses his telepathy, and his telepathic abilities suddenly become the focus. He uses his abilities to draw her out of mental shock and make her conscious, which is his first time really using his abilities to affect someone else. Zatanna had been a victim of the villain Adam, but Adam is now in severe mental trauma from being over-enlightened. Ja'an guilts Zatanna into trying to help Adam. Then he combines his telepathic powers with Zatanna's magic to help the villain Adam become sane again. So these first two issues from DeMatteis have a very intense focus on Ja'an as a telepath. After this, Zatanna leaves the League. Meanwhile, in the Legends event, the President decrees that the costumed heroes should halt all public activities. The law-abiding Ja'an acquiesces and disbands the League, but while disbanding the League, he declares his friendship for the other members and talks about being proud of them in a way that a parent or a teacher would be. He also declares that this will be temporary. But the other members are upset about the end of the team, and especially Vibe and Steel. After this, Professor Ivo's androids come after the League, and the members are easy picking for Ivo's android assassins. They kill both Vibe and Steel, and these deaths are brutal. Vibe battles an android and seemingly defeats it. During these moments, Vibe, who is always depicted as this kid with a huge chip on his shoulder, realizes that Ja'an didn't dislike him and wasn't trying to get rid of him when disbanding the League, but was actually proud of him. He becomes the hero he wanted to be. And then the android reanimates and kills him. But he does get in a request to have a live-action version of himself instead of a cartoon. Granted. Steel's death is also brutal. Steel goes out filled with rage and he fights one of Ivo's androids, who burns off most of his outer layer, revealing how much of a machine Steel is. The damaged Steel is in intense pain and begging for help. Ja'an carries his dying friend back to Detroit, but he can't be helped because the damage is too severe and they turn off his life support. Having his friends die pushes Ja'an to the edge. The normally calm Martian lashes out and smashes things in anger. When an android blames Ja'an for Vibe's death, he smashes it while screaming "shut up" over and over. He clearly feels enormous guilt and sadness over the death of his friends. He disbanded the League, leaving his friends isolated and vulnerable. He finally gets a lead and goes after Ivo by himself in a killing rage. Dale Gunn, a support character from Conway's time, tries to counsel him, telling him that he's a member of the Justice League and not the Revengers, because the Revengers are a different group.
That I want to be on the team. Has it got a name?
It's called the Revenges.
The Revenges?
Because I'm getting revenge. You're getting revenge, and what do you want revenge?
Ja'an is consumed with rage, but when he finally stands before what he believes to be Ivo, he can't bring himself to kill him. And when he encounters the actual Ivo, who has been devastated by mental illness, he is unable to hate the pitiful scientist. He then decides to ignore the President's orders and continue the League no matter what, in order to honor Vibe and Steel's death, and to do so even if the League is hated. He swears he will never dissolve the League, but Vixen, Gypsy, and Elongated Man have all decided to quit, so he is a League of One. In the last issue of Justice League of America, he receives an alarm and rushes off to the pages of the last issue of Legends, where he joins the assembled heroes. Batman is happy to see him, but Ja'an then reports that the League, which Batman is theoretically the leader of, is no more. In Legends, Ja'an then performs what I'm going to call his first flex. By this, I mean he uses his powers in a way that is awesome. And for Ja'an, a lot of times that just means actually using his full set of powers to solve a problem. Because Ja'an has so many powers, he's often shown using only a tiny subset of them. Okay. Ja'an breaks into the White House and impersonates the President. He intercepts terrorists who had come to kill the President, ignores their weapons, and defeats them. He then makes it clear that taking the President's place was easy and barely took effort. The President, it was Reagan at the time, then thanks John and rescinds the restriction on superheroes. It seems like gratitude, but Reagan must have realized that John could have taken his place at any time, and yet he hasn't. He must also realize that if John had followed his edict, the president would be dead, just like Vibe and Steel. But let's be clear. An alien who can copy someone's form, read minds, turn invisible, phase through walls, and fly is the ultimate infiltrator. John rarely does this, but this incident makes it clear that he can, and it is trivial for him. Anyway, John then returns to help the other heroes and legends who are battling Glorious Godfrey. He is there when Dr. Fate proposes rebuilding the Justice League, and of course John is in. He refers to the Justice League as his home. The importance of the League to John is a major element of the character, and it is refined during this time. But at the same time, John does disband the League, and this is one of the central heroic dilemmas for John during this short run. Now, John is a founding member of the League, and I've talked about how this created these implicit friendships, but being a Silver Age hero also carries forward the simple heroism of the Silver Age. John is extremely law-abiding, he doesn't kill, and he always acts as close to that perfect Silver Age hero as he can. He wants to help Adam, the villain whose own evil plan left him mentally messed up. In fact, he almost insists on it, despite the fact that helping him will risk his and his friend's safety. When filled with hatred for the man who murdered his two friends, he doesn't kill him, despite his intense anger. When the law orders the Justice League to be disbanded, he does so. And the League is his home and his family, and in disbanding the League, he leaves his friends vulnerable, and they die. In a heroic dilemma, there is a choice. Does John disband the League as dictated by the law, which he so respects, or does he keep the League, a force for justice, going? John has a great belief in the League. It is the purpose in his life. But the law, which he respects and follows, orders the disbanding of the League, and he does so. But when his friends die, he decides that disbanding the League was the wrong decision. He states, for the sake of justice, the League must never dissolve. He says that the League must continue, even if they are hated, and it must continue to give meaning to his friends' deaths. Okay, I want to take a step back and talk about another influence on comic writers using John, besides Ray Bradbury and Edgar Rice Burroughs. And that is Star Trek, specifically Spock. When creating and writing for an alien character like John, you have a problem. If the character is too alien, human beings won't be able to emotionally connect to that character. It becomes a non-character. But if it is too human in how it acts, it basically becomes a person in a mask and doesn't feel like an alien at all. And that may be intentional in some cases, like Superman is supposed to feel like a normal guy. But in the case of Star Trek, they tried to create an alien character who was mentally and emotionally different than a human, but was also a character that humans could connect to, empathize with, and essentially see as somehow human despite some differences.
Of all the souls I have encountered in my travels, his was the most human.
So Spock was part Vulcan, an alien race devoted to using logic to help control their emotions. Nowadays, we have more exposure to pop psychology, so we might see them as a severely repressed race that definitely veers into mental illness. Trying to murder your best friend for cock-blocking you seems unhealthy. Anyway, Spock was an incredibly influential depiction of a character that was both alien and human, and remember, this was a time when there wasn't as much video content out there, so Spock was the dominant depiction of an alien character during the late 60s and 70s. So, who was a teenager growing up during this time? J.M. DeMatteis, who turns out is a big Star Trek fan. John was also shown as a calm and thoughtful character in Conway's run in order to balance out the other characters. When DeMatteis takes over writing this character, he evolves these traits towards being like Spock. DeMatteis shows John as often cold and unemotional, with lines like, "Tearful goodbyes are not the Martian way." Totally a Spock line. He also describes himself as neither a romantic or a spiritualist. Now, part of the brilliance of Spock as a character is that by having him not show emotions most of the time, it makes it so that when he does show emotions, they become more dramatic and intense.
He thinks just because he don't say anything, it'll have some huge impact when he does open his fucking
Jesus
mouth.
Christ, why don't you shut up?
And DeMatteis uses this with Ja'an. He presents him as calm and stoic. He disbands the Justice League and walks away from the organization that represents his only home and family without being very emotional, in contrast with Steel and Vibe, who both have outbursts. But later, when Steel and Vibe die, this veneer is shattered, and the intensity of his emotions is enhanced, and you get a sense of the depth of his feelings. So J.M. DeMatteis would continue as a writer for the New Justice League, but he did so while working with Keith Giffen, and this collaboration would move Ja'an in a different direction. DeMatteis would also significantly change Ja'an and his origin in the first Martian Manhunter limited series. Giffen and DeMatteis would write the Justice League for 6 years, and during this time they cemented in Ja'an as the core of the League. More on that in the next video. Like, subscribe, and comment if you want to encourage me to keep making videos.